last week or whatever, and I was researching this. She didn't pay $500 down. She paid $750. It's in that recording, and I guess she just didn't want to tell us because she knew that we would be upset about her 500. So it's very clear in black and white. She paid $750, leaving a balance of $2,000 for us to meet at $25 a month. The alcoholic came along with us, and the other girl, or the girl, and there were 2 miserable little bedrooms upstairs. So Margie stayed with us. The alcoholic was where we are sitting here, Mark. I wish we could see the whole house. This area we're in now, which has become part of the living room, was a little back bedroom. 1 little bath. And this is where Jack stayed. That was perhaps not too difficult. There's something wonderful, and I know Mark and Donna are experiencing it. There's something wonderful about having your own home. I don't care how humble it is, but I remember after Aunt Betty had put down that down payment and we moved in, there was one interesting thing about it. When we moved from these other little houses, one to another, we very carefully packed and labeled everything, and so when we unpacked, it was very simple. And when Ken knew it was going to be our own, he said, "Oh, we're not going to label anything." He threw pillows in with cups. He put sheets in with clothes. And when we got into these boxes and into this little house, it was one terrible mess. Of course, Saunders sorted it out. But I remember one of the first things I asked him, he was so amused, because the horrible little rooms. I said, "Ken, can you knock all the partitions out?" He said, "What a funny question." And my home was a very spacious room. My piano room, my studio room, was larger than this existing living room. Marvelous big dining room, huge living room. Bedrooms, bathrooms, and on a whole city block. Tennis courts, or a tennis court. And I couldn't stand these little rooms. So he got under the house, and then he looked at the beams and all, or the foundation, the walls, and he said yes. And I said, "Wonderful. We'll make a lovely home out of it." And when Dad would come over, and he'd say, "Every time I come, there's one less room." And we were proud. We've ended up really almost living in one room, which pleased me very much. That year was, well, now we're looking at 36, 37. What happened then, the 2 little women that we buying the house from passed on. And the place went into estate settlement, and it generally takes 2 years to settle an estate. So one of our very dear friends at the bank was a treasurer, and he said, "Dot and Kenny, you won't have any notes to meet for 2 years. Now's the time to have a baby." And we were delighted, and we talked to Aunt Mittie about it, and she said, "I just think you can swing it if you don't have those house payments." So there came our precious little Kenny. And then 2 years later, you know, our wonderful Jeff. I'll just touch on this. Any couple that want children should have children. Any couple who do not want children, I don't think they should have them. I think that is the first requirement of married couples, to want their children and to prepare intelligently for them. So I wanted 6, but unfortunately, I was fortunate to have the second and begged for him. And Mrs. Johnson was saying, it's an old saying, an only child is a tragedy. And she'd say 2 is better. 3 is much better. It's quite not enough. 4 is very much better. She believed in, if you couldn't, and I've witnessed this in my teaching, an only child so often is a tragedy. But today it doesn't have to be, if parents are wise enough and will deny themselves to to see that a child is exposed to their peer group or those almost their age. And that can be done today relatively easy. I want to talk more about Marietta Johnson herself. And I did talk, I think, in the other tape about having her here, and we had planned...
Well, she didn't really live here.
No,
right.
She didn't get here. We were building on for her. And how her son denied her. I think I told that sad story. I've thought a lot about it. I didn't know him, really. But it seems to me that we're also individual, and we learn certainly through our experiences. But what built up with Clifford Ernest, two things. He was very, very jealous of Ken, and apparently Mrs. Johnson really was very devoted to Ken.
How old was Clifford Ernest?
Ernest must have been, he was 10 years older than Ken. He resented Ken. He also, he wasn't quite that much older, because Aunt Maybe took Kenny when we think about 8 or 9, and Clifford Ernest was still in school at the time. But he did resent him. But mainly what he resented was the lack of time his mother gave to him. Now, of course, I feel that was very unfortunate, very sad, that he couldn't be large enough and great enough to say, look at my magnificent mother, what she's doing. But he said to her, you've been so busy mothering the children of the world that you have neglected me. Now, if I want to put it in that same context with Ken, it was very true with Ken, too. Physically, she was not here much because her work necessitated her going into the world, including to Europe. At that time, she was going to Europe rather, not real frequently, but 4 or 5 times, and to lecture. And of course, she was busy. Of course, she wasn't there to do the putting them to bed and one thing and another constantly. But I certainly didn't harm Ken.
Dealing with her, when the tape went off, you were talking about her son interpreting why he was the way he was.
Yeah.
But then there was something else I said you should mention is about she wanted to keep the large corporations being beholden to them. So.
Yeah. Now, see, there were times I couldn't understand this because the financial strain was so great. But she was determined that she called herself experimental through those years. And she said, if I accept the money that's being offered to me, like the Fords wanted the foundation wanted to subsidize it, she said, then they will have control. I know what boards do. I can't accept that now because, and I think, now this is a supposition, at this particular, the difference in how Kenny reacted to this. All right, with this corporation money, we had an interruption, Mark and I. She just wouldn't accept any monies that had a tie to it, so to speak, like setting up a board when the Ford Foundation wanted to give her money. And my supposition is, I don't know this is a fact, but about this time, she was very prominent in her school in Greenwich and Port Washington. And May Lanier, who was Sidney Lanier's wife, the poet, and Lake Lanier's named after him, she was really responsible for getting Mrs. Johnson to come up to the East, as I remember, to begin with. But she was very prominent and socially prominent and wealthy. And my supposition is that Mrs. Johnson and she had a conflict about how the doors should be opened to what children. Mrs. Johnson used to say, education should never be denied any child. And this is what the organic school is going to stand for. I think that's one reason she was comfortable in the South here with the school, and she had complete control. And one thing that shows in that is one of our tapes where Hazel Payne is teaching that year up in Greenwich, and apparently May Lanier doesn't want the